Hello, folks, I'm back with another episode. Yes, it's been a while, I know that, but today I'm going to talk about something very special. I always say that, I know, right? But this is really special because it's been around for a very long time. It's basically paying my respects to those who paved the way when we talk about learning and learning effectively. It has to do with interacting, actually, social interaction. So, the act of establishing a relationship with other people in the world can be essential for learning. Have you ever thought about that? Can we even learn without social interaction? Well, let's talk about it. So, here's this thing. I was invited a couple of weeks ago to go to a big elite school in Rio. Yes. And I was on a panel discussion with a psychiatrist who, by the way, is a geek just like me. So we became best buddies. And we talked about the effects of the pandemic on the brains of kids and teenagers. So think about it. A lot of those kids have been having remote classes for, I don't know, sometimes even more than 6 months or even a year. So they kind of lost their interaction with peers and the school staff, the school managers, right? And many of those kids and teenagers, they didn't even have the kind of social interaction that they did with their parents before the pandemic, because most of the parents were busy working. A lot of them were still doing remote work, yes, but still they were always busy. They couldn't really help the kids do what they were supposed to do for their classes, right? And then, since we were discussing that, the question was, are those kids going to suffer the consequences of being removed in a forced way from their environment? Yes. The answer, unfortunately, is yes. And I'm not just saying that. I'm actually basing what I'm saying here on this book. Not just a book, but this is a great start. The Social Neuroscience of Education by Louis Cozolino. So he basically says that our brains have evolved to become what they are now as a consequence of increasing the number of members in our tribe. So we have larger cortices so that we can process information coming from different members of people who live together with us in the same village. That means that our cognition is a direct consequence of increasing the size of our social groups. Yeah, that's right. Because that's how we learn effectively, by imitating or observing others. As a matter of fact, I'm sure I've mentioned my wonderful professor, Paul Howard Jones, a million times, but one more, just this once. Well, I'm lying. I'm probably going to talk about him many times in the future. He says that it's in his book, Evolution of the Learning Brain. I've already talked about this book here. There's a system inside our brains called the mirror neuron system. And this is a very interesting system because it basically activates, let's say, whenever we are looking at others do something, as if we were doing the same thing. So we're basically learning by looking at somebody do something. So learning by observing. And that means that we can only truly learn effectively when we are in the presence of others. So whenever we are doing this type of interaction here, you are watching me or listening to me, it doesn't really work as well as if I were there, present, talking to you and actually there in the same room as you are. But the thing is, of course, we cannot do it for everybody, especially during the pandemic, right? So what could be the consequences of remote learning for so many months or even more than a year? Well, we will never know truly. I think the consequences will start to appear in the next decade or so, according to some experts, psychologists, psychiatrists, and even neuroscientists. But we do know that a lot of the research that is available today about how we learn, specifically language, has something to offer. We know that this research tells us, for example, that kids cannot truly learn phonologically when they learn from somebody who's not there. So if somebody is trying to teach a kid, a very small kid, a language, they can not even pay attention to the sounds that the person is making, let's say, because they are not there. They don't focus on people who are not physically in their environment. So this has to do with the research of Patricia Cole and collaborators. We also know, and this you probably studied a couple of years ago when you were training to be a teacher, we know that there is a wonderful author called Lev Vygotsky who basically says that we can only truly learn effectively by interacting with others. And then Vygotsky is one of the social interactionists, or we can even call him a social constructivist, which means that for us to build new knowledge, we don't need to only build new knowledge on top of prior knowledge, as Piaget mentioned, but we also need to do it by interacting with others. If there are no others in the environment, we can't really learn effectively. And that tells us something about the future of learning and teaching. Because we always talk about learning, what about teaching, right? Can we truly be replaced by robots and, I don't know, holograms and things like that? Can we be replaced by artificial intelligence, machine learning? Well, apparently, not really. I'm not saying that we cannot learn online, as I'm sure many of you are hopefully learning from the videos and podcasts that I create, and from many other people, professionals who do amazing things online. And sometimes you can interact live with them, or sometimes you just watch a recording or listen to the podcast a couple of weeks after, right? But you are adults, right? So there is a difference there. When we are growing up and sort of laying the foundations of the most important neural networks in the brain, we really need people to be around. This is how the brain evolved. And if we don't have people to actually help us do a couple of things like self-regulation, we are not very good at self-regulation when we are kids. So we need to have a co-regulator to help us accomplish the things that we need to accomplish, be it at school or in the home when we have to do our chores, for example. So everything depends on the physical presence of an adult. Otherwise, you are not going to be able to perform things that you should. So that's why kids, they could not possibly survive, or I mean, with rare exceptions, of course, if they are not helped by somebody who can self-regulate and understand the world better. It takes a very long time for us to grow our big brains, right? So we need this care by our caregivers. Otherwise, we are probably going to, well, let's say, not last as long as we could, right? So for adults, yes, it can make a difference, learning online. You can access things you had never thought you would be able to access. But for kids, it's a different ball game. So we have to remember one thing. Social interaction. Vygotsky, he was definitely right about the importance of interacting with others in the environment. Not just Vygotsky. I talked about Maria Montessori. I talked about John Dewey. Remember John Dewey? And Paulo Freire, the amazing author from Brazil who studied all over the world, talks about how important it is for you not only to interact in pairs, groups, in different contexts with people, but also to be critical about the things that you do, right? And you can only really achieve that if you are having social interaction, which means that you are present, you are there, people are there around. They are basically giving you something and you're giving them something back. And that's what social interaction means, right? To be around people and to make sure that we respond to their stimuli, right? Now, you might be wondering, what has happened to those kids, to those teenagers? Maybe you are a parent and you have kids and you're probably thinking, uh-oh, so remote classes were not the best way to do it? Unfortunately, the answer is probably yes. According to what we know about the brain, social interaction is fundamental. It's really key when we are talking about developing our brains in a healthy way and learning more effectively. So, the next time you are teaching, remember this: assigning different types of homework to kids or keeping them away from social interaction contexts, let's say, because they have to do a lot of, I don't know, worksheets or anything like that, or even assigning different online things for them to do. Those things are not as important as play, as actually being physically there with other human beings and learning how to operate in this world where other human beings inhabit, right? So we have to remember that social interaction is really amazingly, incredibly important, let's say, so that your students, especially kids and teenagers, can learn more effectively. So instead of just giving them a lot of high order cognitive stuff to do, lists of activities, why not assign the type of homework that gets them to do something with their parents or to do something with their mates, with their friends? It doesn't really have to be so related to the subjects that they are learning, but just by interacting with other people, with kids their age, with teenagers, even with their families, they will be developing their brains in such a way that I'm sure they're going to learn more effectively. So, what do you think, huh? Remember, check out Louis Cozzolino's book, The Social Neuroscience of Education, and go back to Vygotsky, go back to Maria Montessori, go back to Paulo Freire, go back to John Dewey, because social interaction needs to be part of learning. Otherwise, we are not going to learn more effectively, and that is such a shame, especially because we know that the consequences will be quite negative.